as this war in Ukraine rages on, tens of thousands of foreigners have flocked to the country to take part in this war, to defend Ukraine. So explained. Who are the 16,000 foreign fighters in Ukraine joining the resistance against Russia? Following Ukraine's call to foreign volunteers to join their fight against Russia, thousands have signed up from the United States, Canada, and Japan. Many are ex-servicemen, but there are also civilians, a cook, and a comedian. What could possibly go wrong? Central Ohio man among Americans volunteering to join Ukraine's International Legion. So this is local news out of Columbus. After learning that Ukraine had established a foreign legion so people from around the world could help the country fight against Russian invaders, Henry Hoft, 28, made plans to leave Monday to travel to Poland and meet up with others he has met online who want to help. This story has been revised to reflect that Henry Hoft previously used the name Henry Locke and has been associated with the far-right group known as the Boogaloo Boys in the past. Now, we'll come back to that, but there's a reason why after a certain date, they went back and put that he is a Boogaloo Boy. When Henry Hoft found out on February 26th that the Ukrainian government had formed a volunteer military unit for foreign fighters to join the war against Russia, the former infantryman in the U.S. Army applied right away. Hoft, a 28-year-old resident of Freyberg, is among the 16,000 foreigners who, according to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, have signed up for the newly established International Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine. Despite safety risks and legal uncertainties, more than 3,000 U.S. citizens have reportedly applied, with hundreds already arriving in Ukraine. Submitting a passport copy and proof of military experience is all that it takes for American citizens to join the newly established International Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine. Hof turned in his materials to the Embassy of Ukraine in Washington, D.C., and booked a flight to Poland the same day. Hoft, who said he is half Ukrainian on his father's side, has identified himself as a member of the Boogaloo Boys, which has been characterized as a far-right extremist group. Operating under the alias Henry Locke, the man was among a team of Ohio Boogaloo members who were at a Black Lives Matter rally carrying I can't read right now. They were at a Black Lives Matter protest carrying AK-47s, AR-15s, and extra magazines last year. He said he distanced himself from the far-right group after it all got all crazy. However, among the 7 people with whom he is traveling to Ukraine, Hoft said, is Mike Dunn, the former leader of the Last Sons of Liberty, a faction of the Boogaloo Boys. Dunn could not be reached for comment. The group believes it is doing the right thing to take part in the war in Ukraine, even as the U.S. government is discouraging Americans from going over. American volunteers like Hoft are entering a war zone amid dubious legal grounds and discouragement from their own government. While several European nations have encouraged volunteers to sign up for the Legion, the U.S. government has been reluctant to give its approval. Yeah, they don't want to be accused of directly confronting Russia. Ukrainians have shown their courage, and they are calling on every resource and lever they have to defend themselves. We applaud their bravery, a spokesperson from the United States State Department said in an email. However, our travel advisory remains. U.S. citizens should not travel to Ukraine, and those in Ukraine should depart immediately if it is safe to do so using commercial or other privately available options for ground transportation. Making the matter even more complicated are the legal ambiguities that come with working for a foreign armed force. It is not a crime under U.S. law for an individual to go abroad for the purpose of enlisting in a foreign army. At the same time, a violation of the law may occur if someone has been recruited or hired in the United States, according to State Department websites. I wonder if Zelensky going to Congress with propaganda videos falls into that category. On March 2nd, Hoft got a call from an FBI agent advising him against traveling to Ukraine. He told me that I in no way have the support of the U.S. government when I'm over there, and if I get in any trouble, I need to just call the embassy, Hoft said. I get it. They don't want to be implicated if Russia harms any of us, and they don't want to escalate the conflict by saying they're sending American soldiers over. Meanwhile, Russian officials have said that all foreign mercenaries will not be afforded the rights given to lawful combatants according to international humanitarian law, and would face criminal charges or worse if captured in Ukraine. At best, they can expect to be prosecuted as criminals. Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Koneshnikov told Russian state-owned news agency TASS, "We are urging all foreign citizens who may have plans to go and fight for Kiev's nationalist regime to think a dozen times before getting on the way." But these warnings have not deterred those like Hoft from making their way to Ukraine to fight. Ohio man flies to Poland on Monday amid uncertainties. Hoft has little idea of what to expect after he arrives in Poland on Monday. A number of Ukrainian government websites have been taken down by a mass-distributed denial-of-service attack. The website of the Ukrainian embassy in Washington, D.C., which is in charge of coordinating American volunteers, was inaccessible at the time of this story. Hoft never heard back from the embassy after he submitted his application. He only saw in the embassy's Telegram channel that eligible volunteers should head directly to the recruitment station in Lviv, a western city in Ukraine, for further instruction and to presumably get weapons and gear, he said. Local coordinators in Poland, whom Hoff got in touch with via social media, have booked an Airbnb for him and his team in Warsaw. There, they will wait for other volunteers to arrive and then find a way, either by bus, taxi, or with the assistance of a private hire, to cross the border to Ukraine. "I hope this war will end tomorrow, but I will be there for as long as it takes," Hoff said. That's how it started. That's how he felt before he got to Ukraine. Now, this is the same guy after he's gotten to Ukraine. This is from Alex Rubenstein of the Gray Zone. American volunteer in Ukraine describes how foreigners who flocked over to the country to fight Russia are being used as cannon fodder and are threatened by Ukrainian forces with murder if they refuse to deploy on suicide missions.
What is going on? Alright. We were part of the Georgian National Legion, 102nd Ukrainian Territorial Defense. So for anyone who are wondering what is going on, alright. We were part of the Georgian National Legion, 102nd Ukrainian Territorial Defense. Okay? Our base got fucked up. The base right next to us got fucked up. Americans, British, tons of British dead. Alright? They're not saying nothing. They're counting our dead as their dead. They're trying to send us to Kiev with no fucking weapons, no kit, no fucking plates. The people who are lucky enough to get weapons are only getting magazines with like 10 fucking rounds, okay? When they wanted to send us to Kiev, we said no. Our whole group, a bunch of Americans, Canadians, British. So they told us we had to get the fuck out of there, they were gonna shoot us in the back, alright? So me, this British guy, and another American, we fucking hid in the back of an ambulance to get out. We got to the border, and it was a whole nother mess. When you get to the border, anyone who has kit, anyone who has any military shit, they're fucking pulling you out of the line and they're sending you back to the front. We got dropped off about 5 clicks from the fucking from the border, and we walked. Um, and we get to the border in this humanitarian group with a bunch of ex-SF veterans from England. Pull us to the side and say, you need to get, like, pulled us out and fucking, like, hit us. And they were like, you need to dump all your kit. They're pulling people out, cutting up passports, sending them back. So we dumped our shit. We got, like, in all of our fucking, we got in, like, Red Cross vests, and they had, like, fucking humanitarian passes to get us through the Ukrainian border. People need to stop coming here. It's a trap, and they're not letting you fucking leave. The best way to leave is like in a Vic or a car or something. People who get on by vehicle have a better chance of hiding their fucking kit in the back, doing whatever the fuck they can, but do not try to leave Ukraine on foot if you're a volunteer. It's a mess, and it's a trap, And I have multiple people who can confirm this story for me. I'm getting...
All right, so not only did he come to regret it, but he's spelling out a situation that most Westerners are not getting that same picture from their media. The Ukrainians are in a desperate fight. They're completely outgunned. And foreigners being sent there, they're not going and fighting this just war for these innocent people who need defending. They're going and they're joining up and they're being used as cannon fodder and have literal Nazis threatening to shoot them in the back. What Nazis? These Nazis. NATO flag, Azov flag, UN flag, Nazi flag. Look at this. Excuse me, not excuse me. Wow. Excuse me, not UN. This is the NATO flag, the Azov flag, and the Nazi flag. Those Nazis. What Nazis? These Nazis. What Nazis? These Nazis. Those Nazis. So this is from the Gray Zone. This is an interview with that same former soldier who went to volunteer in Ukraine. A U.S. veteran who volunteered to fight for Ukraine describes a suicide mission. An American volunteer for Ukraine tells the Gray Zone how his foreign legion tried to use him as cannon fodder. A decade after, Henry Hoff joined the U.S. Army at 18. So, also, by the way, after this video came out, this is March 15th, is when so this was March 6th, and then 2 days after that video really got the rounds on social media, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, is when they updated it to let you guys know that Henry Hoff is a Buglu boy and a far-right extremist. So if he is telling stories about how he was used as cannon fodder, it's only because he's an extremist slash he was cosplaying. Meanwhile, he is a former infantryman, and I think the Buglu boys are not the Proud Boys, and they're also not Nazis. And I think him being a Buglu boy is kind of irrelevant to the story that was being told. But anyway. A decade after Henry Hoff joined the U.S. Army at age 18, he was back on the battlefield, but this time as a volunteer for a foreign military engaged in a proxy war against a powerful foe. After answering the Ukrainian government's call for foreign fighters this February, however, the American veteran quickly decided he was being sent on a suicide mission against the Russian military. After escaping with his life, claiming his own allies had threatened to shoot him in the back, Holt posted a viral message advising other Westerners against joining the fight in Ukraine. Within days, he was at the center of a global information war, with the military for which he had volunteered publicly branding him a Russian agent. It was not the first time Holt had placed himself in the middle of controversy. Years before his ill-fated mission to Ukraine, his passion for guns and Second Amendment led him into the ranks of the Buglu Boys, an enigmatic, militia-style organization that confounds even self-styled extremism experts. Members of the Buglu Boys uphold a staunchy anti-communist, anarchistic perspective that incorporates political positions and symbols similar to both radical right and leftist movements. They have marched in support of Black Lives Matter, to the obvious discomfort of many liberal social justice activists, and protested coronavirus lockdowns, usually while openly touting assault rifles and sporting the Hawaiian shirts that have become their trademark. So yeah, the Buglu Boys are not easily categorized. Holt was a prominent figure in the Ohio chapter of the Buglus and appeared at the Ohio State Courthouse in Columbus to deliver introductory remarks at an armed unity rally. There, he emphasized the group's nonpartisan politics and defended a transgender activist from insults. Here's Henry Holt as a Buglu. But Hoft said it was not his former affiliation with the militia-style organization that drew him back into the field of armed combat. Instead, it was the emotional impact of news flashing across his Facebook timeline about Russia's invasion of Ukraine this February and being taken in by heart-rending stories of civilian suffering. So they're trying to slander this guy. He's a boogaloo boy. He's crazy. He went over there because he wanted a fight, and then he got one, and he realized he didn't want to fight. No, this guy went over there because of the propaganda in the West. That's why he went over there. He fell victim to the propaganda. Yes, there is tremendous civilian suffering going on, but adding more weapons and more soldiers to the mix is not going to end that civilian suffering. He was a father now, and he saw his own child in the faces of Ukrainian youth fleeing for their lives from the Russian military onslaught. So the moment Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky implored Westerners to travel thousands of miles across the ocean to join his country's fight, Hoft mobilized. Every friend of Ukraine who wants to join Ukraine in defending the country, please come over. We will give you weapons. Zelensky appealed days after the full-scale war erupted. When he arrived in Ukraine, however, he was forced to confront the dispiriting reality of a ragtag volunteer paramilitary thrust into a proxy war against a powerful military machine. After about a week, he decided he had signed up for his own death. They're trying to send us to Kiev with no fucking weapons, no kit, no plates. The people who are lucky enough to get weapons are only getting magazines with like 10 fucking rounds, Hoff complained in a viral video rant from the field. People need to stop coming here. It's a trap, and they're not letting you fucking leave. Hoff went on to make a series of explosive claims, including that the passports of Westerners trying to leave Ukraine were being torn up, that foreigners were being sent to the front without rifles, and that Georgian Legion was threatening to shoot those who refused. Once it became clear that Hoff's account was undermining Kiev's public relations campaign, the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine denounced him on its official Twitter account, branding the American as a stooge of Putin and posting his photo besides the caption, "Made in Russia." So this is the thanks he gets from the country he just volunteered to die for. Just because he didn't want to go on a suicide mission without any weapons or gear or ammo. Next, Georgian Legion fighters joined the social media assault, denouncing Hoft and branding him as a liar. Whatever may or may not be circling right now from Henry, one American volunteer claimed in a video published by Daily Wire reporter Casey Dillon, is completely false. Finally, the corporate media trained its sights on Hoft. Ukraine's foreign fighters ridicule American boogaloo boy who ran away. This guy's a former soldier. He's been to a war zone before. Ukraine's foreign fighters ridicule American boogaloo boy who ran away, a headline from the Daily Mail tabloid said. A boogaloo boy tried to join the Foreign Legion in Ukraine. It didn't end well, claimed Rolling Stone. And via the aggregator Raw story, boogaloo boy's attempt to fight in Ukraine ends in disaster and him fleeing. You see the pattern developing there? Amidst the corporate media's taunting, Hoff agreed to an interview with the Gray Zone. He told this reporter that he was determined to set the record straight about his connection with the Boogaloo Boys, his political views, and most importantly, the serious dangers volunteers face on the Ukrainian battlefield. There's no such thing as glory and death, Hoff told the Gray Zone. You're going to die in a trench, and you're going to get left there, and it's gross, and it's bad. After entering Ukraine, Hoft and a few fellow volunteers made their way to Lviv. In the town center of Lviv, they're recruiting people from a bunch of different groups. You had Georgians, Ukrainians from local militias, and you also had more hostile groups like Azov and stuff like that, Hoff recalled. When Henry Hoff signed up for the Ukrainian Foreign Legion in late February 2022, he was convinced his experience as an Army veteran trained in infantry tactics and mortar fire would make him a valuable asset. Tens of thousands of foreigners who flocked to Ukraine, pouring across the Polish border with the quiet assent of NATO governments and zealous encouragement from Kiev, apparently felt the same. Being a veteran that has a specific skill set, I felt like I could put it to better use there in Ukraine than sitting here on my couch while watching women and children be targeted by Russian forces, Hoff told the Gray Zone. A few days before shipping off to Ukraine, he told the Columbus Dispatch, his hometown paper, about the raw emotion that was driving his decision. So we read that article. Russia is firing on civilian structures, and there are kids who died. The fact that so many veterans across countries are stepping up, that's very inspiring to me. We feel like if we can hold Putin for long enough, we could possibly stop a world war. So that's how potent the propaganda is. It has people believing that if they sign up to fight, if we just add more soldiers, more arms, more aggression, that can de-escalate this war from a proxy war back down to nothing. In reality, it's just going to escalate this war from a proxy war to possibly a nuclear war. Today, Hoff says, I still feel the same way, but I never had an intention of going to Ukraine on a suicide mission. I have a child, I have work, I have school. My original intent wasn't even to be a frontline combat soldier. I intended to volunteer, which I did, and provide training, medical supplies, and support. Hoff submitted to the Ukrainian embassy in Washington, D.C. a copy of his passport and proof of his military experience, the sole requirements of foreigners looking to fight in Ukraine. Once he arrived in Poland, getting over the border was a very easy process, he said. It was very fast-paced. It took us probably 5-10 minutes to get into Ukraine. But as Hoff explained to the Gray Zone, getting out was not so easy. After entering Ukraine, Hoff and a few fellow volunteers made their way to Lviv. Since I must have messed up the slides. But since the Ukrainian Foreign Legion required a contract, Hoff opted to join the Georgian Legion, which was conveniently stationed nearby. So he didn't want to sign a contract. So he's like, oh, the Georgian Legion, they don't want a contract. I'll join up with them. I wonder why the Georgian Legion is sitting right next to the Ukrainian Foreign Legion tent and they're not requiring a contract. I wonder why. Incorporated into the Ukrainian military, the Georgian Legion runs 3 bases with hundreds of fighters. Previously a unit that fought on the front lines against Donbass, the Georgian Legion is now headquartered in the west, where it is led by Mamuka Mamulashvili, a veteran of 4 previous wars with Russia, including Georgia's disastrous invasion of South Ossetia. Mamulashvili and a small group of men he led during the Maidan coup d'etat have been accused by fellow Georgian fighter Alexander Rivalashvili of carrying out a dastardly false flag massacre in Kiev's central square. So I've covered this before too. Foreign fighters and Georgian fighters, Ukrainian nationalists did a false flag in the Maidan coup to escalate the protests into a full overthrow of the government. They fired on protesters and the police to incite violence between those two groups. According to Revashvili, Mamulashvili, I'm so bad with these names, I'm sorry, ordered his snipers to open fire on a crowd, killing 49 protesters in a cynical attempt to escalate the conflict by pinning the blame on the government they were seeking to topple. So this nutbag who is a Nazi ultra-nationalist who is fine with cold-blooded murder of dozens of civilians and blaming it on other people, doing false flags and murdering real people. Here he is, poses with then House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Eliot Engel. Look at him rubbing shoulders in the US of A. Photos from both 2017 and 2018 posted on Facebook by Mamulashvili show the Georgian hard man inside the U.S. Capitol rubbing elbows with some of the top figures on the House Foreign Relations Committee. They included then Representative Eliot Engel, Representative Carolyn Maloney, former Rep. Sander Levin, Rep. Doug Lamborn, and former Rep. Dana Rohrabacher. He posted more photos showing him visiting Senate offices, including that of Senator Dianne Feinstein, the former chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Over the years, a number of infamous foreigners have passed through the ranks of the Georgian Legion, including American veteran Craig Lang, who is accused of a grisly double murder in Florida, Joachim Furholm, a Norwegian neo-Nazi and bank robber, and Ethan Tilling, a former member of the neo-Nazi right-wing resistance group in Australia. Here's Craig Lang. An interview on behalf of the Georgian Legion from the front line in Donbass in 2016. So here he is torturing poor Ukrainians 6 years ago, in case you thought this war started 6 weeks ago. After arriving in Ukraine, Hoft and a detachment of Western volunteers for the Georgia Legion found themselves based in an old hospital converted to a military base in Dubliani, on the outskirts of the western city of Lviv. Oh, that's strange. They found themselves based in an old hospital converted to a military base. I'm sure if Russia was to bomb that military base, we would hear how they're bombing a hospital. Can you see how propaganda works? There, Hoff trained Georgians in American military tactics as he grew increasingly aware of the I can't speak today. This is like the 40th time I've struggled speaking, and I apologize to you. There, Hoff trained Georgians in American military tactics as he grew increasingly aware of the paramilitary group's seamy side. After Hoff and other volunteers snuck back into Poland with aid from a handful of British volunteers, they gave an extensive interview to British media, which Hoff recorded surreptitiously and provided to the Grey Zone. During the hour-long interview, the former volunteers detailed the brutal practices they witnessed by Ukrainian-aligned forces. Hoff recalled the story of two unfortunate civilians who attempted to pass through a checkpoint. They were yanked out of their car by Ukrainian soldiers, black-bagged, then taken into a building to have their throats slit. We don't even know if they were actually spies or just people who ran through a checkpoint, Hoff said in the recording. A British volunteer then told a story of an old man who wandered onto his compound. They grabbed this bloke, and they did everything. And he got thrown out. And they fucking basically searched him then and there. And I know, what are they going to do to him afterwards? Hoft went on to claim that the Georgian Legion had even welcomed jihadist elements into his ranks. Another American ex-volunteer commented to the UK journalist, "Not that it's wrong, not that it's bad. I had a guy in a prayer cap and a big fucking beard run up to me. I'm in fucking Ukraine. Why am I hearing Arabic?" On March 13th, Russia struck the so-called International Peacekeeping and Security Center in Yavoriv, an active base of the International Legion of Territorial Defense of Ukraine, or the Foreign Legion, previously the location that had hosted U.S. and Canadian training for Ukrainian fighters. So this is, basically a de facto NATO base at this point. Hoft was in Dublini that night, where he, and by this is basically a NATO base, I mean all of Ukraine, not just this base right here, the Foreign Legion's base. I mean all of Ukraine is de facto a NATO base at this point, and we're using, Hoft felt like he was being used as cannon fodder. The entire Ukrainian country and people are being used as cannon fodder. Hoft was in Dubliani that night, where he and the Georgian Legion faced nightly air raids, but unlike the nearby base in Yaroviv, his barracks was never hit directly. Russia has claimed 180 fighters were killed in the strike in Yaroviv, while Western sources put the number at 35. While I was there, it was 35 dead and 150 wounded or missing, but those missing could definitely have been found to be killed in combat, Hoff told the Grey Zone. Especially in explosions, you might not know how many are dead. And I think they're counting them all as Ukrainian at this point because they just don't have the logistics to figure out who's who and where they come from. According to multiple testimonies from volunteers, the Ukrainian government is giving foreign fighters permanent residence and counting their deaths as Ukrainian. On the night that the Foreign Legion base was struck, all of our alarms started going off as well, Hoff said. That's when Hoff says he was consumed with a sense of dread. Georgians ran into our barracks room and were like, "Hey, get your equipment, go to the woods." According to Hoff, he and others refused the order because they had no weapons. That's just a recipe for disaster. Even if we didn't make contact with Russian troops, he said, you could be shot in the back just because you don't speak their language. It can be a miscommunication. It's just such a mess. So such a mess. Imagine volunteering, thinking you're going to help things, and this is the situation you end up in a base with a bunch of Nazis and weirdos, and you're watching war crimes get committed left and right. It's insane. And you're the part of the less powerful faction. You're going up against a way more powerful faction in Russia. About 3 days after arriving, the Georgian Legion sent a group of volunteers to Kiev with nothing. No plates, no weapon, no kit. They told them that they would get their weapons once they got there, Hoff recalled. Days later, the volunteers deployed sent his group text messages complaining that they had yet to receive weapons they were promised. One guy was like, "Oh, I got a weapon, but I only got 10 rounds of ammunition." We heard a story of one guy getting a Glock and being sent to go patrol an airport. Some of those volunteers that they sent had no military experience, Hoff said. One of them, a young British kid, had never even picked up a weapon in his life. Hoff and his... So put yourself in the mind of the Georgian Foreign Legion or any of these Ukrainian units. If you're getting a bunch of foreigners, some of them who've never even picked up a gun before, I mean, wouldn't it make sense to you to use them as cannon fodder? I mean, I'm not giving them an excuse, but it's, what would you expect? Like, everyone in the West watches too many movies or something. Like, you think you're going to go to a foreign nation and volunteer to fight and they're just going to trust you and, like, I don't know, you're going to be some kind of hero and the Americans are here, yeah, or so, I don't know. No, bro, they're going to throw you out in front of them and watch you die first. They don't even know if you're a spy. They don't know if you really care about them. They don't know if they can trust you. They've never trained with you. They have no camaraderie built. Stop watching movies and thinking it's reality, Westerners. Stop thinking you're going to go over to Ukraine and kick ass. You're going to get killed. Hoff and his cohorts decided then that they would not go to Kiev unless given proper weapons and ammunition. You can be ambushed on your way to Kiev, he said, and that's it. This is him taking shelter in an air raid. Shelter during an air raid. The Georgians apparently learned that Hoff and company had drawn a line in the sand and were incensed. A Ukrainian soldier came up to us while we were having like one of our little meetings, and he was like, "Hey, the Georgians know you're not going. They're pissed," Hoff said. The Ukrainian told them that the Georgians were threatening to shoot you in the back. As the shouts out to that Ukrainian soldier, by the way, risking his own life to warn these poor foreigners who came to his country to try and help him that other foreigners are threatening to shoot him in the back because he's not willing to go die without any weapons. He's not willing to do a suicide mission. As the Gray Zone previously reported, the rat line of armaments from the west to Ukraine has amounted to one of the largest and fastest arms transfers in history. Yet Hoff was not the only foreign volunteer to describe his role in Ukraine as cannon fodder. "I think most of the Western equipment is going directly to the Ukrainian military," Hoff told the Gray Zone. "They want to keep the casualties of their people to a minimum. So if you have a bunch of volunteers, if you have a bunch of foreigners that come to volunteer, send them in first." Once he and his group were told that the Georgians had plans to execute them and pass off the killings as combat related, they hurriedly gathered their gear, hid in the back of an ambulance, and headed straight for Lviv. Before long, they were crossing back over the Polish border. On their way out of the country, Hoff said, he and 2 or 3 were approached by a couple of British guys that were doing other things. Sounds like the West has special forces there doing very, very illegal things. Hoff was reluctant to divulge exactly what the Brits were up to. They took us to a secure location. They gave us contacts to, American special forces guys, was all he would say. Yeah, sounds to me like they're doing very illegal stuff in Ukraine. Hoff recalled the British fighters warning them about Foreign Legion tent near the border crossing that was full of fighters turning back anyone attempting to cross with military gear. "They're basically sending them back, and they're taking their passports and sending them back," the British told them. Now that Hoft is back in the United States, he's determined to warn other American veterans considering taking the trip to Ukraine that this conflict is dramatically different than the more familiar counterinsurgencies of Iraq and Afghanistan. The last time maybe we got into something this bad could have been Vietnam, but we even had air support then, he said. You don't have air support in Ukraine. You don't have the superiority of artillery, you know? Russia's the one with the rockets. They're the ones with the cruise missiles. They're the ones with the jets flying overhead, drones, all that. I just think everyone needs to carefully think about every possible scenario. I just want to make sure that everyone takes that into account and knows that, hey, you're not a Ukrainian soldier. You're a foreign fighter, Hoff emphasized. They're going to probably use you first. So there you have it. How it started to how it's going. The story of just one of the foreign fighters who only lasted just a couple of weeks there in Ukraine. Insane. There's lots of stories coming out about war crimes, about civilian deaths, escalation in the war. All of it's really hard to believe. The fog of war is very thick. As they say, the first casualty in a war is the truth. But Henry Hoff's story is super important. I think more people should hear it. And right here, we have a couple of related stories that popped up at the end of this article at the Gray Zone. I think everyone should read them and check them out. A couple of Ben Norton stories. I miss Ben Norton. I wish he didn't leave the Gray Zone, but he had a disagreement over COVID with Max Blumenthal, and I think they kind of went their separate ways. But two Ben Norton stories. NATO-backed Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko poses with pro-Nazi soldier. That's back from 2018. Here's 2017. U.S. government and media whitewash Nazi Holocaust, citing the debunked Black Book of Communism. And then from March 31st of this year, this is from antiwar.com, partnering with neo-Nazis in Ukraine, an inconvenient history. And this is, I just love the screen grab they took of this. It's a picture of Stefan Bandera, which is famous Nazi collaborator, garbage human being from World War II. And we have international man of mystery, sex symbol, Volodymyr Zelensky, and he's saying, Stefan Bandera is a hero for some percentage of Ukrainians, and that's normal. That's cool. So yeah. That's the people we're supporting, guys. Banderaites, ultra-nationalists who will shoot people in the back if they don't go on suicide missions.
Dylan! You son of a bitch. What's the matter? The CIA got you pushing too many pencils? Huh?